I think one of the greatest and most overlooked joys of being a child is taking comfort in experiencing the things you love over and over again. Having all the time in the world but none of the money forced me to find more enjoyment in the things I already had, which also led to me rereading the same stories, rewatching the same movies, and replaying the same games a lot. Each time through these experiences, I noticed new details, felt new emotions, and settled deeper into these wonderful worlds. While each playthrough, or watch through, or read through was slightly different, it was only repeat treks through books and movies that would bring about completely new feelings than the initial reads and watches. A movie that seemed happy at first became incredibly sad the second time I watched it, or a book that felt dull and boring became sweet and wonderful during the second reading. Knowing the ending of anything can certainly color your perception of it, but for me, no video game really shifted in tone like other pieces of media had. Even games I've hated haven't been able to achieve this 180 in emotion because, let's be honest, if I don't like a game, there's no reason to play it again. I frankly haven't thought about this phenomenon until the very first time that a game did fully change from the first playthrough to the second. Not to break the fourth wall or anything, but I absolutely wanted to show you all this game sooner. Halloween was approaching, so I wanted to talk about one of my favorite horror games, but then my cheap capture card broke, I wasn't really planning on getting a new one, then by the time I did, I was almost done with my Superliminal video, then I was distracted by some other important stuff, and when I finally had a chance to record something, I just really wanted to play this game again, despite being past the 2 scariest times of the year. What I'm trying to say is that even though the narrative of this game is extremely unique and will change any future playthroughs for you, you don't have to play this game twice to be able to enjoy its incredibly off-the-wall story, high-risk, high-reward gameplay, and spectacular overall design. So, if you're looking for a standout indie horror game, you should play Remothered Tormented Fathers. Remothered Tormented Fathers is a stealth-based survival horror game from developer Stormind Games and publisher Daryl Arts. It was released on Windows platforms on January 30th, 2018, and came to PS4 and Xbox One later in the same year, before being ported to the Switch in 2019. Skipping past the intro cutscene, the game begins with the player taking the role of Rosemary Reed, a doctor from the Santa Margarita Institute, seeking out a former patient by the name of Richard Felton. Rosemary is able to get into Felton's house and speak with him about his rare condition and why he left the Institute, but it takes all of a few minutes for the interview to turn to Felton's long-lost daughter and for Felton's nurse, Gloria, to call the Institute and find out that Rosemary isn't actually a doctor there. Rosemary gets kicked out, of course, but sneaks back into the house to seek out Felton's wife, and then finds herself trapped in a mansion with a dude who very desperately wants to kill her. Cue a whole bunch of sneaking, snooping, and frantically trying to find a way out. This is a story that is best experienced firsthand and without spoilers, with one major exception. While I try to be positive about the games I recommend on this channel, that doesn't mean that they don't have their own issues, and this game has a particularly large one. There are a few reveals in this twisty-turny story, and one of them can understandably be seen as tone-deaf and hurtful towards the LGBT community. Listen, this isn't the kind of game where every story point's meaning is laid out in perfect clarity, which leaves room for interpretation. And while my interpretation of the story may be a positive one, others may take issue with it. This twist isn't the only one in the story, but it is a huge part of the narrative. So if you feel that it might make you uncomfortable, I encourage you to look into it before getting the game if you choose to do so. Like I said earlier, my own interpretation of this point is actually a positive one for the community, and I still feel that there are plenty of positive aspects in this game, enough to recommend it. Whichever choice you make is up to you. I just felt it would only be fair to offer a warning before I continue. Now, on with the video. While the basic premise of this story sounds simple, Remothered Tormented Fathers' narrative is one of the most erratic and unpredictable stories that I've ever seen. This extends all the way through the dialogue. The game itself is foreign, the creator of the game, Chris Darrell, is Italian, and sometimes foreign horror can bring about different feelings in the viewer or player. Really, this stems from being spooked in ways that many Americans wouldn't think of, but it also comes from the writing of the experience, not so much in the grammar or spelling, but more from the different ways that languages are paced and how that may translate into English. In my experience, American horror dialogue is paced fairly slow, so playing this game with its super snappy conversations is a bit jarring and fitting for a horror setting. Here's the first chat between Rosemary and Felton so you can understand what I mean.
Do you believe in God, miss?
Well, it would be too easy, wouldn't it? I believe in people's willpower. Everything else is not God, but an aptitude or mankind's cruelty.
This is the kind of fairy tale I prefer at my age. When you're worn out from an incurable disease, you start having some doubts. Why is there so much life in such small but lethal creatures? An arbiter, that's all we need.
For what? It's wrong and crazy. It's human nature.
That same nature in which we are equals to those ants eating each other. But, pardon me, I forgot my manners. Please, sit down.
Lightning quick, right? This dialogue gives the player an almost frantic feeling, making you want to scream, "What the heck is going on?" even when you totally understand what's happening. It might seem from the get-go that this is a typical good versus evil story, but, as with most modern horror games, it's way more complex than that. The narrative does this creative switcheroo, where it portrays each character as one-dimensional and either good or bad, then through the story it reveals that each character is neither all good nor all evil. Everyone in the story has messed up in some way, everyone has done bad things, but everyone has also done good and helped others in their lives. Each character feels more human after you've traversed through the whole story. This humanization really tilts the narrative to a bit of a sad side. Like I said in the intro, in my first playthrough I was mostly entranced by the wild twists and turns, but my second playthrough really made me focus on the characters and the unfortunate nature of this whole ordeal. Every character really is a victim, and it broke my heart to see bad things happen to them, even when they did bad things themselves. Connecting with the characters isn't just because they're humanized, but also because of the incredibly small cast of characters in the game, and I think this is one of my favorite aspects of Remothered Tormented Fathers. I tried to keep track while I was playing, and I think this game has less than 15 mentioned and named characters, and only a handful of those actually show up in the game. Sure, most horror games have relatively small casts, but they also make it feel like the game is bigger by 1. Adding in disposable enemies like zombies that make it feel like at least there used to be more people in the world, and or 2. Adding extra characters in notes and cutscenes that die as quickly as they're introduced to, again, make it feel like there used to be more people in the world. This tiny cast really made the game feel a lot more claustrophobic in a strange way. Like all the bad things that exist in this world are only in this mansion and are all out to get you. And it also made the world feel a lot more lonely, seeing all these rooms full of places to sit and chat, but no one there to enjoy them. The snappy dialogue mixed with the heartbreaking characterization of the small, lonely casts creates a sort of whiplash in the tone of the game, which fits perfectly with how the gameplay frantically switches between sneaking and hiding to dodging and running. Survival horror is a strange video game genre because of how different every game in the genre can be. I think when most people think of survival horror, they think of games like Resident Evil, where the player has to solve puzzles in between shooting zombies or monsters with what little ammo they can find. The other half of the genre includes games like Amnesia, Slender, and Silent Hill, where you still have to survive, but the characters you play aren't combat experts, and/or don't have access to weapons that may actually destroy enemies, so you have to rely on sneaking around to live. Remothered Tormented Fathers falls into the latter category, where Rosemary Reed is just a normal lady in high heels and a skirt, and there are no guns or other high-powered weapons strewn randomly across the Felton estate. So the name of the game is Stealth. Sneak and hide, rinse, repeat. This requires a lot of crouching, a lot of waiting, and a lot of patience. Sneaking is pretty self-explanatory. Taking sight of your enemy and walking away from them lessens your chances of getting killed. Crouching makes less noise than walking, and it's best to pause by tall objects to get a better understanding of your surroundings without being out in the open for the bad guy to come get you. The game lets you switch views over each of Rosemary's shoulders to get a better look around corners, which makes sneaking a little bit easier. Hiding is also important, especially if your enemy is really close or you have no idea where you are. There are some wardrobes to hide in and couches? Benches? To hide under, and each spot gives you a different perspective of the area around you. Rosemary definitely gets a little uncomfortable in those claustrophobic situations, but you can stay there as long as you want, and it's useful to wait and watch for the movement pattern of the person you're trying to hide from, so you can get a better idea of where and when to go. Of course, just sitting and waiting makes things a bit boring, so Remothered Tormented Fathers offers ways to speed up the process through diversion and defense items. There are several different types of diversion items with different uses. First, there's breakable items like snow globes and cups that break when you throw them. These are useful for distracting nearby enemies as they'll head for the sound of the item, giving you some time to sneak by, but you can also throw these items at the baddies to stun them for a bit. Ropes are used for tying down doorknobs, which is useful for when you head to an area you're going to stay in for a while, or for blocking the bad guy from easily navigating through certain pathways. There are also a few diversion items you can't pick up, like this clock, and activating them will draw your enemy right to where the item is located. These kinds of items are much tougher to use because they're in pretty isolated spaces. But if you can use them, they're great for finding where the bad guy is, and sneaking behind them as they leave to get to where you need to be. Defense items are also exactly what they sound like, items used to defend yourself. If the baddie catches you, you can use a defense item to temporarily stop them from attacking you, and to give you just a tiny bit of time to get away. But you don't need defense items if you just keep sneaking, right? Well, not so fast. It's not that easy. With how easy it is to get turned around in the mansion, how many puzzle items create loud sounds, and how often cutscenes end right next to an enemy, you will get caught and chased many times throughout the game. If you have a defense item, you can use it if your pursuer gets too close to you, but if you don't, you do have the opportunity to dodge past them if you haven't sprinted poor Rosemary to her last steps. If you don't have either of those options, well, I hope you saved recently. Your best bet after that is to dash to a hiding spot out of the enemy's line of sight. If you hide right in front of them, you're gonna get caught, come on. And stay there until they move back to their normal pattern. If the baddie gets near your hiding spot, you'll have to be really still to get them to leave. Then it's back to more hiding and sneaking. The hiding and sneaking is all for the goal of finding a way out of the mansion, and this is achieved through solving puzzles. Well, they aren't exactly complicated. It's more like finding something that needs something else to work, or finding the something else that makes another thing work. Regardless, if you do a little sneaking, find something stuck in a drain, do some more sneaking, find a plunger, then you know to sneak back up to the drain to use the plunger. Putting items together is what furthers the plot of the game, so as incredibly entertaining as it is to play a dangerous game of tag in the mansion, make sure you actually look around for some useful items. Despite having to look for specific items, there's actually a lot of freedom in how you play this game. Sure, there are plenty of spots in the game where you need to use diversion items, enter chases and hide to get out of them, follow new rules when they get introduced, etc., but there are plenty of times where you don't have to. I don't consider myself an especially patient person, but whenever I play this game I sure turn into one, to the point where I constantly refuse to use the diversion items in favor of just waiting things out. There are plenty of times when I get caught, of course, but they were all my own fault, and then I get to choose my own path to a hiding spot or to just blast past the enemy into where I need to go to see what I need to do next. The mirrors where you save the game also restore your health, so each time I got myself into a mess, I was always able to get out of it, and it feels all too satisfying to get through a game by weaving around some of the rules. If you aren't quite as patient as I am, however, there is one way to play the game just a bit quicker, though it may be frowned upon. Look, I'm not one to judge people who use guides to play games, as I've used my fair share of them, and there are a number of spoiler-free guides for this game that are particularly good. Nothing too fancy, just things that tell you where to go to find certain items, but if you want to experience the game's story without too much hiding and sneaking, these guides might be for you. As with all horror experiences, design is just as important as story, and this game delivers. Remothered Tormented Fathers has this hard-to-describe stylized aesthetic to it, which certainly helps to make the world look much older than it actually is, and it provides some wonderful horror scenes. In a game with a variety of warnings, this game definitely has some scares and grotesque imagery, and it also creates some striking pictures that I just can't get out of my head. Additionally, the visual design of all the characters in this game is so good, from Rosemary, who clearly didn't come prepared to be trapped in a mansion and chased by killers, to the baddies, all of whom I can picture perfectly in my mind's eye. Heck, if we scoot back and talk a bit about how erratic and sad the story is, the entire last cutscene of this game lives rent-free in my head and will probably be the last thing I think about before I die. Like the horrible images you'll see while playing this game, the scary music hits you right in your heart. Sure, the tunes ramp up when you're being chased in a way that makes you feel even more frantic.
I knew it! You weren't invited! Still here?
But it's the, hey, an enemy is nearby, music that sinks right into my soul. It's so creepy and sets you on edge to the point where you're bound to make more mistakes and get caught. The rest of the music in this game really heightens the incredible sorrow that is weaved through the story. The sound design works to deepen the immersion, and the voice actors do an incredible job maintaining the tone throughout the game, like here when one of the bad guys is screaming, or at the beginning where the nurse is telling Rosemary to quit smoking.
Bad habit.
Smoking?
Yes, such a shame. You should quit. You have no idea how bad this is for you. Not only for your health, but it's also very expensive. Money and time wasted.
Wait, pause. I recognize that voice, though I think she would normally be saying something like,
"It's locked."
Okay, it's fess up time. Credited in the game as Alien Illman is one of my absolute favorite voice actresses, Lanny Manila, who many may recognize as the voice of Nancy Drew. I know she's been in other stuff, but going from abusing her voice lines in one of the game's checklists...
Can't check that off yet. Can't check that off yet. Still have to do that. Still have to do that. Can't check that off yet. Haven't done that. Can't check that off yet. Still have to do that. Still have to do that. Can't check that off yet. Still have to do that. Check.
To hearing the phenomenal range she has in Remothered Tormented Fathers is a big leap in the best direction. The visual and sound design of this game are fantastic and tie in perfectly with the story and gameplay, but it's really the little touches in this game that make it shine for me. Things like showing Rosemary as a heavy smoker, then hearing how labored her breathing is after she runs for just a little bit. Being able to hide behind certain objects in just the right circumstances, where in other games the enemy would be able to just see right through those objects. And seeing that most of the defense items strewn around the mansion are actually common household items like scissors or knitting needles, really pull all these wonderful bits together into one cohesive and memorable experience. Remothered Tormented Fathers is a uniquely beautiful experience that humanizes its flawed characters even while they're actively trying to kill you, and it's come a long way in my eyes from a game and a YouTube video I was interested in to an experience I think about way too often. If you're looking for a game that gives you a lot of freedom in how you play, with great scares and a story that really changes as you replay the game again and again, don't miss out on this out-of-nowhere classic.
You deceived us all.
I can't take anymore.
and save me for a larger society. There's only one God, and he already wrote your end. Stop, sinner!
Can't check that off yet.